At 9:27 a.m. on December 13, 1943, Second Lieutenant Philip Adair banked his Curtiss P-40 and Warhawk into a steep climbing turn above Assam, India, just as 64 Japanese aircraft emerged from the pale morning haze 3 miles to the east, flying directly toward Denjan airfield. Adair, only 23 years old, had already completed 43 combat missions with the 89th Fighter Squadron guarding the dangerous Hump airlift route into China. But on this particular morning, he was the only American fighter pilot already in the air when the enemy formation appeared. During the previous 8 weeks, Japanese bombing raids across northeast India had destroyed 47 Allied transport planes on the ground and killed 112 servicemen. His P-40, nicknamed Lulu Bell and painted with the number 44, carried 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns with enough ammunition for barely 12 seconds of uninterrupted firing. Ahead of him flew 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers protected by nearly 40 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters positioned in layers above and below the bomber stream. Intelligence reports from Burma had shown that raids of this size routinely achieved devastating results against undefended airfields, often hitting their targets with terrifying accuracy. Below Adair, Denjan airfield contained 14 fully loaded C-47 transports carrying essential supplies to Chiang Kai-shek's forces in China, a field hospital with 63 wounded soldiers, and enough fuel reserves to sustain Hump operations for 11 days. If the bombers reached the field untouched, Allied supply efforts across the Himalayas could be crippled for weeks. The closest friendly fighter support sat 38 minutes away at Jorhat. Adair glanced at his fuel gauges. Full internal tanks, 180 gallons, enough for roughly 90 minutes at combat power. The Japanese formation cruised 3,000 feet below him at 240 miles per hour, steadily approaching the airfield. Standard combat doctrine instructed fighter pilots to avoid engaging when outnumbered more than 5 to 1. Philip Adair faced odds of 64 to 1. He could stay back, radio for help, and shadow the formation until reinforcements arrived. But by then, bombs would already be falling on Denjan. The only alternative was to attack alone and somehow break apart the raid before it reached the target. Adair shoved the throttle forward. The Allison V-1710 engine roared instantly as manifold pressure climbed to 54 inches. The P-40 surged ahead, accelerating past 320 miles per hour. He maneuvered into position 4,000 feet above the bombers, approaching from the south with the morning sun at his back. The Oscar escorts still hadn't noticed him. Their eyes remained fixed on the target ahead. Surprise was his only real advantage. Japanese pilots expected interception near the airfield itself, not 20 miles away. Adair planned quickly. Strike the lead bombers first. Ignore the fighters. Disrupt their bombing formation. Force confusion. Make them scatter. Could a single P-40 truly throw 64 enemy aircraft into chaos? The lead group of Sally bombers flew in tight formation, 6 aircraft arranged in 2 V-shaped elements. Adair rolled inverted, dropped the nose, and plunged toward them from high behind their 7 o'clock position. His speed built rapidly. 360 miles per hour, 380. The Allison engine screamed at full power. Distance vanished fast. The bomber crews still hadn't spotted him. At 800 yards he opened fire. 6.50 calibers thundered together, streams of tracers streaking into the lead bomber. Bullets tore across the left wing. Fabric ripped apart. Metal sparked violently. Then the Sally's port engine erupted into flames. Thick black smoke poured from the nacelle. The formation instantly dissolved. Bombers broke left and right, abandoning their tight V pattern in confusion. Adair hauled the P-40 upward under crushing 7G force and rolled sharply to the right just as 40 Oscar fighters dove toward him. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar ranked among the most agile fighters in the Pacific. Powered by a Nakajima Ha-115 engine delivering 1,150 horsepower, it could reach 329 miles per hour at 13,000 feet and turn tighter than any American fighter in theater. Its distinctive butterfly flaps allowed pilots to bleed speed in turns without stalling, an advantage Japanese aviators used mercilessly. Over the previous 6 months, Oscars had destroyed 63 Allied fighters above Burma and northeast India. Adair's P-40N possessed superior straight-line speed thanks to its 1,240 horsepower Allison engine, capable of 378 miles per hour below 12,000 feet, but in turning combat the heavier Warhawk would quickly lose energy against the lightweight Japanese fighter. American pilots flying P-40s against Oscars followed one absolute rule: never turn with them. Use speed. Strike fast. Escape. Reset. But Adair couldn't run. If he disengaged, the bombers would simply regroup and continue toward Denjan. He needed to keep them disorganized and under pressure, even if it meant battling 40 enemy fighters by himself. The first 4 Oscars attacked from his high 10 o'clock in a loose finger 4 formation. Adair rolled left, pitched upward, and fired a 2-second burst at the lead aircraft. The tracers passed high. The Oscar snapped right while its wingman followed. Adair reversed direction and dove away to preserve speed. 2 more Oscars dropped on him from above. He spotted them at 400 yards, yanked into a climbing left turn, and fired again, missing once more. His ammunition counter showed 800 rounds remaining across all 6 guns. Maybe 6 attack passes left at this rate. Behind the fighters, the Sally bombers attempted to reorganize. 3 separate formations of 6 aircraft each were reforming into bombing patterns. If they stabilized again, they would continue the attack. Adair estimated perhaps 90 seconds before the bombers reached their release point over Denjan. He rolled level, jammed the throttle fully forward, and dove toward the bombers again. 8 Oscars chased him downward. The P-40 accelerated past 405 miles per hour in the dive, faster than the Oscars could follow. Opening distance, Adair leveled near bomber altitude and lined up on the formation to the right. At 300 yards he fired. Tracers smashed into the lead bomber's right engine. The Mitsubishi Ha-101 radial detonated in a massive fireball. The bomber rolled violently, trailing burning debris, while its wingman veered away to avoid collision. Adair kicked hard rudder left and sprayed another sally. His rounds punched through the bomber's thin fuselage. The Ki-21 carried no armor protection and lacked self-sealing fuel tanks. Though obsolete by 1943 standards, it could still deliver over 2,000 pounds of bombs, more than enough to devastate Denjan airfield. Now 12 Oscars converged on him. Fuel remaining, 162 gallons. Ammunition, 650 rounds. The bombers were 19 miles from Denjan. Approximately 4 minutes remained before bomb release range. Then the engine temperature began climbing. The Allison V-1710 was liquid-cooled. Coolant circulated through the engine block and cylinder heads before passing through a radiator mounted beneath the fuselage. At manifold pressures above 50 inches, temperatures rose dangerously fast. Sustained operation at those settings was only safe for around 20 minutes. Adair had already been running maximum power for 11. The coolant gauge now read 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal temperature was 210. At 250, catastrophic failure became likely. He faced 3 choices. Reduce power and cool the engine. Break off and return home. Or continue fighting and risk total engine failure over enemy territory. The Sally bombers remained 17 miles from Denjan and still threatened the airfield. Adair kept the throttle fully open. 2 Oscars attacked head-on. Combined closing speed exceeded 600 miles per hour. At 500 yards both fighters opened fire, 7.7 mm tracers racing toward his nose. Adair fired back. His heavier .50 caliber rounds carried farther and hit harder. At 350 yards, bullets smashed into one Oscar's engine cowling. The fighter shuddered and broke away, trailing white coolant vapor. Its wingman followed. Adair rolled right and dove again. Coolant temperature, 240 degrees. The Sally bombers were now 15 miles from Denjan. Two groups had successfully reformed into bombing Vs. The third remained scattered. Adair targeted the lead formation again. 6 Oscars tried to intercept him, but he blasted past them at nearly 390 miles per hour. At bomber altitude he opened fire on the lead Sally. His burst struck the right wing root. Structural failure followed instantly. The outer wing folded upward and ripped free. The bomber rolled inverted and spiraled downward. No parachutes appeared. The formation shattered once more. Bombers scattered in every direction. Even if they dropped bombs now, they would land harmlessly across miles of jungle instead of concentrated on Denjan airfield. Adair pulled sharply upward. The coolant gauge read 248 degrees. The engine vibrated violently. Detonation rattled inside the cylinders. If he didn't reduce power soon, the Allison would seize completely. Then 8 Oscars dove on him simultaneously. He spotted them too late. He rolled left, sluggish now. 7.7 mm round slammed into his right wing. Fabric shredded. Metal buckled. One bullet severed part of the right aileron linkage, making control response sluggish and uneven. Another burst stitched across the fuselage. Bullets ricocheted from the engine cowling. One pierced the coolant reservoir behind the firewall. Green coolant sprayed across the windshield. The temperature needle surged beyond 260 degrees. Steam exploded from gaps in the cowling. Oil pressure began falling. The Allison engine was dying. Adair chopped the throttle back. RPM dropped from 3,000 to 2,400. The aircraft immediately began descending. 1,000 feet per minute. Then 1,500. The Oscars circled above, waiting patiently. Then the engine caught fire. In liquid-cooled aircraft engines, fire followed a predictable chain reaction. Burning coolant ignited first. Flames spread forward along the airflow around the cowling. If fire reached the fuel lines on the engine's left side, the aircraft would explode. Adair probably had 30 seconds. Standard procedure demanded immediate shutdown and bailout. But he was only 8,000 feet up, descending rapidly over jungle patrolled by Japanese troops, 12 miles from friendly territory. He kept the engine alive. The Allison's fuel mixture could be manually leaned. Adair pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff for 3 seconds, starving the flames. Fire intensity decreased slightly. He pushed the mixture back forward. The engine coughed violently but resumed running, rough and weakened. Power output had fallen to roughly 60%. Barely enough for level flight. He was now committed to reaching home in a crippled aircraft with a burning engine, or dying in enemy territory. Behind him, the Sally bombers were 13 miles from Denjan, still close enough to reverse course and attack. But their formations had completely collapsed. Individual bombers were already turning southeast toward Burma. The raid had failed. Denjan was safe. Adair turned southwest toward Nagili Airfield, 43 miles away. About 15 minutes if the engine survived. 6 Oscars followed behind him. At 7,000 feet, oil pressure dropped to 0. The Allison depended on pressurized oil to lubricate the crankshaft, connecting rods, and internal bearings. Without oil, metal ground directly against metal. Friction created heat. Heat caused expansion. Expansion led to seizure. Engine vibration intensified. The propeller spun unevenly. Airspeed fell to 180 miles per hour. The P-40 stalled at 120. His margin for survival narrowed dangerously. Behind him, the Oscars closed to 400 yards but never fired. They simply watched, waiting for the American fighter to die. One Japanese pilot pulled alongside close enough for Adair to see his face. The pilot pointed downward. Land. Surrender. Become a prisoner. Adair ignored him. At 6,000 feet, smoke filled the cockpit, not from the engine fire this time, but from damaged electrical wiring behind the instrument panel. The fuselage hits had shredded cables and electrical bundles. Smoke burned his lungs and eyes. He slid the canopy open. Wind blasted through the cockpit, clearing some smoke but making breathing difficult. Airspeed dropped to 160 miles per hour. The Oscars backed away. They no longer considered him a threat. The crippled P-40 seemed doomed to crash in the jungle below. At 4,000 feet, disaster struck again. The right aileron cable snapped completely. The control surface slammed full deflection. The P-40 rolled violently right and pitched into a dive. Adair pulled back on the stick with both hands. Nothing happened. The elevator cables had also been damaged. He had almost no pitch control left. The aircraft accelerated downward. 200 miles per hour, 220. 250, jungle rushed upward. 3,000 feet. 2,500. 2,000. Then Adair realized something. The damaged aileron forced the right wing downward. The broken elevator cables left the tail trimmed nose down. But aerodynamics worked both ways. If he rolled inverted, the damaged controls would reverse their effects. The wing force downward upright would force upward inverted. The nose-down trim might actually raise the nose upside down. The very damage killing him upright could save him inverted. At 1,800 feet above the jungle, Adair rolled the P-40 completely upside down. Negative G-forces slammed him against his shoulder straps. Blood flooded into his head. Vision reddened. The fuel system struggled under inverted loads. The Allison sputtered violently, nearly dying, but continued producing power. The nose rose. The dive slowed. At 1,200 feet, the P-40 leveled while inverted at 140 miles per hour. Adair held the aircraft upside down for 40 seconds. Airspeed increased to 160 miles per hour. Amazingly, the aircraft began climbing, slowly, barely 50 feet per minute, but climbing nonetheless. Then fuel starvation returned. The engine faltered again. He rolled upright. Instantly the damaged controls forced the nose downward once more. The aircraft descended 600 feet per minute. After losing several hundred feet, Adair rolled inverted again and regained altitude. The cycle continued. Upside down to climb. Upright to restore fuel flow. Roll. Climb. Roll back. Descend. Repeat. The 6 Oscars above watched in disbelief. A burning P-40 with shattered controls repeatedly flipping inverted and upright while clawing its way toward safety like a wounded animal refusing death. One Oscar finally approached to investigate. Adair saw him, rolled inverted for altitude, then snapped upright directly toward the Japanese fighter. The Oscar immediately broke away. Either the American was insane or impossibly determined. Either way, the Japanese pilots chose not to engage further. They turned east toward Burma. Adair continued toward Nagili alone. Fuel remaining, 83 gallons. Oil pressure, still 0. The engine should have seized minutes ago. Connecting rods should have welded themselves solid. The fact it still ran defied every mechanical principle. Somehow the Allison survived on sheer momentum and whatever microscopic oil film remained. Altitude climbed through 3,000 feet, then 4,000. Nagili Airfield lay 21 miles southwest, around 11 minutes away. The coolant temperature gauge had failed completely, the needle had literally melted off. Smoke still streamed behind the aircraft, though visible flames had disappeared. At 5,000 feet, Adair finally spotted Nagy ahead: the runway, revetments, tower, safety. But another problem immediately emerged. The landing gear operated hydraulically, powered by the engine. His engine barely functioned and could die any moment. If he lowered the gear too early and lost power, he would crash short. If he attempted a belly landing, remaining fuel could ignite the aircraft. He needed the gear down before the engine quit. His right hand shook violently, not fear, but carbon monoxide poisoning from 14 minutes of smoke inhalation. He lowered the gear lever. Nothing happened. The P-40's hydraulic system operated at 1000 psi using an engine-driven pump. With the Allison nearly dead, insufficient pressure existed to extend the landing gear. Thankfully, the aircraft carried an emergency hand pump mounted beside the cockpit. 28 manual strokes could lower the gear. Adair grabbed the pump with his left hand while trying to maintain control with his right. He pumped. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. The pump required both hands for effective pressure, but releasing the stick meant surrendering control to the damaged surfaces. Thinking quickly, he loosened his lap belt, wrapped it around the control stick, looped it through the seat frame, and tightened it enough to hold approximate neutral control. Crude, but workable. He seized the hand pump with both hands and pumped furiously. 5 strokes. 10. 15. At 23 he felt hydraulic resistance. Pressure was building. On the 28th stroke he heard a heavy metallic thud beneath the cockpit. The left landing gear locked down. 3 seconds later the right gear followed. Drag increased immediately. Airspeed dropped from 160 to 135 miles per hour. Barely above stall speed. The engine now produced perhaps 40% power. Nagy runway sat 7 miles ahead. 3 minutes away. His vision narrowed into gray tunnels. Carbon monoxide poisoning was attacking his brain. He forced himself to focus. 6 miles. The remaining temperature gauge showed 310 degrees, far beyond limits. Inside the Allison, expanding metal components were moments from catastrophic failure. Any second a piston could seize or a connecting rod snap. 5 miles. Tower personnel saw the damaged P-40 approaching with smoke trailing behind it. They expected a normal landing pattern. But Adair's flaps were hydraulic too, and there wasn't enough power left for both gear and flaps. The flaps remained retracted. Without them, landing speed increased dramatically, 120 miles per hour instead of 90. A flapless landing in a damaged fighter required nearly the entire 4,000-foot runway. Then, 2 miles from the runway, the engine finally died. The propeller stopped turning. Silence replaced the roar. The P-40 became a powerless glider, and a poor one at that. A normal Warhawk could glide around 8 feet forward for every foot of altitude lost. From 2,000 feet, theoretically he could reach the runway. But combat damage had destroyed the aircraft's aerodynamics. Bullet holes and twisted metal created massive drag. Realistically, he would come up short and crash into jungle. After surviving 64 enemy aircraft, after flying inverted for 11 minutes and nursing a burning engine across Burma, he was about to die a few hundred yards from safety. Then he remembered something from training about inverted glide performance. Under certain conditions, inverted flight could actually reduce drag. No instructor expected pilots to truly attempt it. But Adair had no alternatives left. At 1,800 feet and 1 mile from the runway, he rolled inverted once again. Blood surged into his skull. Vision darkened. The jungle appeared upside down above him. Airspeed stabilized at 125 miles per hour. Descent rate dropped from 700 feet per minute to roughly 500. The inverted glide was working. Ground crews at Nagili stared in disbelief as an upside-down P-40 with landing gear extended approached the airfield. Technically, Sergeant Robert Martinez watched through binoculars and initially thought a Japanese pilot had captured a Warhawk to strafe the field. He sprinted toward a nearby .50 caliber gun emplacement with several crewmen following. Adair descended through 400 feet, still inverted, half a mile from the runway. Consciousness faded. Carbon monoxide poisoning and prolonged negative G-forces were shutting his body down. He estimated maybe 20 seconds before blackout. He needed to roll upright and land, but not too soon. If he rolled early, the damaged controls would drive the nose down and crash him short of the runway. Too late, and he would overshoot. At 200 feet altitude and 300 yards from the threshold, Adair rolled upright. Instantly the damaged aileron forced the right wing down. He fought it with every ounce of strength. The nose wanted to plunge. He pulled back desperately. The broken elevator cables gave him barely enough control to hold attitude. The P-40 crossed the threshold nose-high, wobbling violently. Martinez's gun crew tracked the aircraft through their sights, unsure whether it was friendly or enemy. He made a split-second decision and held fire. Adair slammed onto the runway hard. 7GS compressed the landing gear completely. The tailwheel crashed down. Metal screamed across concrete. The right main gear collapsed instantly. The right wingtip struck the runway and dug in. The P-40 spun violently through a 180-degree ground loop, showering sparks and concrete fragments before sliding backward another 200 feet and finally stopping. Smoke billowed from the ruined engine. Fire crews raced forward. Adair sat motionless for 12 seconds. Then he unfastened his harness, climbed onto the wing, and nearly collapsed as his legs gave out beneath him. Ground crew caught him before he fell. Martinez and the fire crew opened the engine cowling. The Allison engine was destroyed beyond repair. Pistons had seized solid. The crankshaft warped. Oil pan ruptured. Coolant covered everything. Together they inspected the aircraft. 16 bullet holes scarred the fuselage. 7 pierced the right wing, for the left. 1 bullet had completely severed the right aileron control cable. Another destroyed the hydraulic reservoir. Electrical systems behind the panel were shredded. The engine suffered catastrophic overheating and total oil starvation. 3 connecting rods had welded directly to the crankshaft. Lulu Bell would never fly again. But Philip Adair had saved Denjan Airfield. Intelligence later confirmed all 24 Sally bombers turned back without releasing a single bomb. The raid collapsed 15 miles short of the target. 40 Oscar fighters escorted empty bombers home to Burma. No Allied aircraft on the ground were destroyed. No personnel were killed. All 14 C-47 transports remained operational, and the hump airlift continued uninterrupted. 3 days later, on December 16, 1943, headquarters officers from the 10th Air Force interviewed Adair in detail. He described his attack runs, the inverted flight technique, and the landing. Flight surgeons examined him and discovered dangerously high carbon monoxide levels still present in his blood 72 hours after the mission. By all medical expectations, he should have lost consciousness during the final 11 minutes of flight. Somehow he remained functional purely through determination. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell, commander of U.S. forces in the China-Burma-India theater, awarded 2nd Lieutenant Philip Adair the Silver Star. The citation praised his gallantry in action against enemy forces on December 13, 1943, when Lieutenant Adair, flying alone, disrupted a formation of 64 enemy aircraft attacking Allied installations, continuing combat despite severe aircraft damage and personal injury, thereby preventing destruction of critical supply facilities. Adair later completed 95 additional combat missions with the 80th Fighter Group and eventually became an ace with 5 confirmed kills. During his final combat sortie in July 1944, he shot down two Ki-43 Oscars over northern Burma. Returning to the United States in September 1944, he survived the war and remained in the Air Force for 3 decades, retiring in 1971 as a full colonel. The 80th Fighter Group, the famous Burma Banshees, continued combat operations until August 1945, destroying 413 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and another 147 on the ground. They lost 63 pilots killed or missing. Their skull insignia became one of the most recognizable symbols in the China-Burma-India theater. The P-40 Warhawk never gained the legendary reputation of the P-51 Mustang or P-47 Thunderbolt. It was slower, outdated, and ineffective at high altitude by 1943 standards. Yet in the hands of pilots like Philip Adair, the rugged Curtiss fighter demonstrated a timeless truth: victory in combat depended less on machinery and more on the courage and determination of the man flying it. One pilot. One obsolete fighter. 64 enemy aircraft. On December 13, 1943, Philip Adair proved that impossible odds mean nothing to someone who refuses to surrender. His solution to shattered flight controls, alternating between inverted and upright flight for 11 straight minutes, defied every accepted rule of aviation. His upside-down landing approach with gear extended had never been attempted before and was never repeated afterward. And that is the story of the Burma Banshees and the day a single P-40 pilot shattered an entire Japanese air raid.